CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: Ukraine's president visits the front line around besieged Bakhmut amid signs that fighting in the city is now at deadlock. Our other headlines: 1 million rounds of ammunition. EU leaders prepare to agree a military aid package for Ukraine as they meet in Brussels. French workers protesting against President Macron's plans to raise the pension age, block access to a terminal at Paris's main airport. And we live in interesting times. Both the UK and the US raise rates to tackle inflation despite the turbulence in the financial sector. Ukraine's president has made a surprise visit to the area around Bakhmut in Ukraine amid signs that fighting in the city has now stalled. Volodymyr Zelensky visited troops in the Donbass, which has seen some of the worst fighting of the war. 9 people were killed overnight in Russian strikes on Kyiv and in the city of Zaporizhzhia, where 2 apartment blocks were shelled. Meanwhile, the International Criminal Court in The Hague has expressed concern over comments made by Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, who suggested the court may be a bombing target for Moscow. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith in Russia. Stuart, what exactly has Medvedev been saying?
Well, he said 2 things this week in response to that arrest warrant put out by the International Criminal Court. Most recently, he suggested that should any attempt be made to arrest the Russian President Vladimir Putin on any territory anywhere in the world, it can expect in response all of Russia's means, rockets and so on, to fly, for example, he suggested, on the Bundestag, in the Chancellor's office and so forth. But the first response he gave was also quite similar, although directed specifically at the ICC. He suggested that it's quite possible, he says, to imagine the targeted use of a hypersonic missile from a Russian ship in the North Sea to the Hague courthouse. He noted that such missiles cannot be shot down and then recommended that International Criminal Court judges keep an eye on the sky just in case. That hypersonic missile is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. So 2 threats that indeed the International Criminal Court says it regrets. In terms of the power Dmitry Medvedev has, although he was the former Russian president, he's now deputy chairman of the Security Council, so he himself doesn't hold that kind of power, but he is well known now within Russia as someone that gives statements more at the extreme end of the responses that the Kremlin provides. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin press secretary, in response to the arrest warrants, said that this was an outrageous and unacceptable move, and the Speaker of the Russian Parliament claimed Yankees hands off Putin, although the US, like Russia, isn't a party to the relevant convention that gives the ICC power within both the US and Russia.
Stuart, British and Ukrainian intelligence suggests that Russian troops are losing momentum in the battle for Bakhmut. What's the view from Moscow?
Yeah, well, the official view from Moscow so far has been silence all this week. We've not heard any updates either from the Wagner private military contractors nor the Russian Ministry of Defense about what exactly the status is there. So due to the reporting restrictions, I can't suggest any kind of information. However, there is some information coming from India about how this so-called special military operation is affecting Russia's defense exports. The Indian Air Force, in a statement to a parliamentary committee, said that a delivery they had expected later this year, a major delivery, will not happen, and the IAF said that's due to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Now, India depends on Russia for 2 main things: spare parts for its aircraft. 2 of its fighter jets would need to come from Russia, and also the S-400 anti-aircraft missile defense system. Now, the S-400, third squadron of which was most recently delivered to India in February. There are 2 more expected, so it could have been that, Indian media speculates, or perhaps it's aircraft spare parts. But the Indian Air Force did give a hint as to how much the value of this missed delivery is. It suggested it's around $320 million US, which it now will no longer need to pay Russia for any defense equipment, and so it needed less budget for the rest of the year.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Well, military aid to Ukraine is the focus of the talks as EU leaders meet in Brussels. They're set to endorse a deal that will see the EU send 1 million rounds of artillery shells to Kyiv within a year. The deal will be the first time the European Union has joined forces to jointly buy military supplies. Let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier, watching events for us in Brussels. Alex, tell us more about this deal.
Yeah, Jamie, you're absolutely right. It is a historic first, and it's easy to forget now, more than a year on since the start of the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, how much the European Union has had to change, what it does and how it does it. And this is a very, very clear example of that. As you said, 1 million rounds being sent in the next 12 months to Ukraine. The tidy sum in total, this package of 2 billion euros. 1 billion euros will be used to fund countries, member states going through their stocks at the moment, see what they have and ship it to Ukraine as quickly as possible. And then you've got another billion euros after that, which will be spent on new orders, new munitions being purchased, both to send to Ukraine and to backfill the stocks in the European Union that are obviously being sent to Ukraine as we speak and in the next few weeks. So that is a 12-month plan, 2 billion euros to do so. There's also the option, if they need to, not just spend this on artillery shells, which are obviously the big focus at the moment. Those 155mm artillery shells are the core reason why this plan is being put forward, but there is also the option to purchase missiles and send them to Ukraine as well. That hasn't been confirmed as an action they will take yet, but it's certainly an option that they're giving themselves. So a historic first. It really is a change for the European Union. Here in Brussels, we also share the city with the headquarters of NATO, so there's a kind of overlap there now with these two alliances moving and helping to support Ukraine in its conflict against Russia at the moment. So this new plan, 2 billion euros, and then another plan on top of that, and that hasn't been funded. The details are pretty thin at the moment, to ramp up production, to boost the European Union's defence industry, to make sure that there isn't a situation where anybody runs out of ammunition. So quite a significant announcement that will be signed off, we hope, or we think, today here in Brussels by the 27 heads of state, Jamie.
And President Zelensky, due to address this gathering, is further military help going to be under discussion?
Yeah, President Zelensky will address the European Council at some point this afternoon. It'll be via video link. Of course, he was here for the last European Council. We reported on that then. Further military aid is always a bit of a question mark at the moment. I think the conversation, or the reason why he is joining the leaders for this particular summit, has been billed as to respond and react to this new ammunition announcement. But there's two EU member states, Slovakia and Poland, have announced they will be sending M20 or MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. That has been the big question for a very long time now. Those MiG-29s are 1980s Soviet-designed fighter jets, not exactly what the Ukrainians had asked for. They want NATO standard, modern, preferably American fighter jets is what they're after. But at the moment, only Poland and Slovakia offering to send jets to Ukraine. For the rest of the European Union, certainly the European Union as a whole, that is still not moving forward. There's still discussions ongoing, but I have no doubt that President Zelensky will most likely reiterate that request today. So the focus today is very much on that new announcement, that 2 billion euro package of ammunition in the short, medium and long term, both for Ukraine and the European Union, and more discussions as the conflict evolves, I'm sure, Jamie.
Alex, we'll come back to you during the course of the day, but for the moment, our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Thank you. There's major disruption across France as hundreds of thousands of people return to the streets for another day of strikes and protests, angry at President Macron's plan to raise the pension age. Demonstrators have blocked access to a terminal at the main airport in Paris, while in Toulouse, people set fire to rubbish bins blocking a main road. This all comes a day after President Macron vowed to push on with his controversial reform, which raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. Well, let's try and talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen on a rather dodgy line in Paris. Ross, I think we've got you. What precisely is happening there today?
Yeah, hi Jamie. If you can see me here in Place de la Bastille in centre of Paris, you might also be able to make out some of the protesters on the column in the middle of the square behind me. This is where the demonstration is beginning today, Thursday, on for the Paris leg of these demonstrations. There are hundreds taking place up and down France. It is another day of mass mobilization, another day of social action. More pressure from multi-sector strikes and demonstrations on the government, forcing it to drop its pension reform is the ultimate aim of these protesters here. Speaking to some of the demonstrators earlier, they say there is no fatigue. They're ready for week after week of demonstrations and pressure to come if needed, as much as is needed to force the government to change course. The bill hasn't become law yet, but President Macron, speaking on Wednesday, said he wants it to come into force by the end of the year. The next step for that bill is to clear the Constitutional Council, where experts rule on the constitutionality of all the articles in the bill.
Well, my sincere apologies for that. I think the satellite feeds from France are on strike as well, but I think we got the gist of what Ross Callan was saying. We'll come back to him later during the course of today. Now, the rest of today's news, and protesters in Israel have blocked roads as demonstrations continue against the overhaul of the judicial system. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has introduced new legislation limiting the authority of the Supreme Court. A law has also been ratified limiting the circumstances in which a Prime Minister can be removed. Opposition lawmakers say it's just a way to protect Netanyahu, who's on trial for corruption charges. China's military says it has monitored and driven away a United States warship near the Paracel Islands in the disputed South China Sea. Beijing says the guided missile destroyer, the USS Milius, illegally intruded into China's territorial waters, undermining peace and stability. The US Navy says the ship was conducting routine operations and will continue to sail wherever international law allows. Protests have broken out after a court in India sentenced opposition leader Rahul Gandhi to 2 years in prison for defamation. This follows a 2019 campaign rally in which Gandhi implied Prime Minister Narendra Modi was a criminal. Gandhi was granted a month's bail in which he can appeal against this verdict. He's one of Modi's main rivals ahead of the 2024 general election. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. If you have a mortgage, look away now. Interest rates rise in the United States and the UK to combat rising inflation.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Ukraine's president visits the front line around besieged Bakhmut amid signs that fighting in the city is now at a deadlock. Our other headlines: 1 million rounds of ammunition. EU leaders prepare to agree a military aid package for Ukraine as they meet in Brussels. And French workers protesting against President Macron's plans to raise the pension age, block access to a terminal at Paris's main airport. The Bank of England has increased interest rates for the 11th month in a row. UK interest rates now stand at 4.25%. That's up from 4%. This is the highest level in 14 years. Rates have been increasing to tackle rising prices. This latest increase follows a surprise jump in inflation to 10.4% in the year to February. The UK government's inflation target is 2%. On Wednesday, the United States Federal Reserve also raised its key interest rate to levels not seen for nearly 15 years. Rates rose 0.25 percentage point to a range of 4.75 to 5%. Well, as with the UK, the US Fed is trying to bring down high inflation. Prices in February were 6% higher than a year ago, but that's significantly lower than the 9.1% peak of inflation seen in June. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Laura Makin-Isherwood in London. Laura, so the Bank of England raising interest rates again. They're all now doing the interviews at the TV studios. What are the reasons the officials are giving?
Well, it's all about this inflation rate, the one that you've just set out there. It is simply higher than analysts, experts and those officials at the Bank of England want it to be, sitting at 10.4% in February, up from 10.1% in January. Now, the reason for that lift in inflation between those 2 months is being put down to that shortage of fruit and vegetables that the UK has seen over the last few months. That's, of course, had an impact on the market in terms of supply and demand, and so consequently pushing that inflation rate even higher. What it means for people, of course, is that their money simply isn't going as far as it used to, and so the Bank of England has now decided to raise this base rate interest rate by 0.25% from 4% to 4.25% in a bid to try to bring that inflation rate down. Why do they do it? Well, they think that increasing that interest rate will reduce the sort of tendency of people to spend, try to reduce the number of people looking to take out loans and other debt situations as well, in a bid to try to decrease that spending, and they hope that that will try to bring it down. But as you said, the target rate for the Bank of England is 2%. It is well away from that, and with consistently high energy prices, really high shopping prices when people head to the supermarkets to get their weekly food and drink shop, then there's a real challenge on not just the Bank of England's hands in terms of trying to get that figure down, but also, of course, the government's as well, trying to make sure that people can make ends meet as we move through this year.
Difficult few days for coming to this decision. I mean, all this comes after a turbulent few weeks in the financial sector. There's a lot for those deciding monetary policy to chew over, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that sort of turbulence within the European markets after the issues that Credit Suisse were facing, that concern that the bank could go under. It's since been bought in a merger deal by UBS Bank in Switzerland, and it came off the back, of course, of the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the United States. And we've seen central banks across Europe continuing to lift their interest rates pretty consistently. We saw the ECB last week raise it by 0.5%, the Bank of England just choosing to go by 0.25% today. But of course, there are wider ramifications to these interest rate lifts as well. It changes how banks are having to manage their portfolios, their sort of financial situations themselves, and so it applies extra pressure to that banking system. That in turn will basically affect the markets as well, and so we're consistently having to shift and change, and all these bankers and those bosses that are working really hard within the financial sector to keep things level have an increasing challenge as they consistently adapt to this changing field.
Laura, thank you for that. Our correspondent Laura Makin-Isherwood in London. The restructuring plan for the offshore debt of the world's most indebted property developer has failed to impress some of its creditors. Many are concerned about long repayment periods of 12 years in the Evergrande deal. Creditors are also unhappy that no domestic assets have been included in this deal. The company has offshore debts of almost $23 billion as part of liabilities totaling $300 billion. The plan aims to save the group from a disorderly collapse. Australia has unveiled the final details of a referendum to be held later this year, which seeks to recognise the country's Indigenous people in the constitution. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have never been acknowledged in the 122-year-old constitution. The proposed amendment would establish an advisory body that promotes Indigenous views to the government and to Parliament. The world's first 3D printed rocket launched successfully on Wednesday in Florida, but it failed to reach orbit due to an engine problem. Relativity Space, who make the rocket, said 85% of its 3D printed. The test mission is considered to be a significant step forward for the company, as it shows the viability of the company's manufacturing approach. Get mums back into the workplace. That's the plan in China. As China's birth rate falls, the government in the city of Zhongshan is offering incentives to companies to encourage more mothers back to work, as well as the financial benefits. Those companies who offer flexible working hours are also getting more out of their employees. CGTN's correspondent Zhao Chufeng reports.
Many recruitment events are being held across China, and some of the employers are offering special openings for moms posts, attracting the attention of many netizens. These posts often allow flexible working hours or earlier off-work times. In China's southern city of Zhongshan, local government issued a document last year that defines and regulates moms posts, and also offers incentives for companies to set up more positions like this.
We give subsidies to employers who offer moms posts to women with children under the age of 12. For employing each moms post, employers can get a subsidy of 100 yuan per month and a social security subsidy of 300 yuan per month.
Xie Xiaoling has 2 young children, and she's now employed on a mom's post in Zhongshan.
I feel this post gives me financial and mental independence. My family is also very supportive of my job, and I can now take care of both my family and work.
At the same time, some employers say setting mom's posts is also benefiting them too.
The establishment of moms posts can improve the stability of employees, so greatly reduce the recruitment pressure of our enterprises.
While most netizens in China welcome more moms posts, some do question why there aren't dad's posts, as fathers should take care of children too. And the local government in Zhongshan is looking into that too.
We also consider that it might be dads or grandparents of working age who are taking care of children. We are also doing research. In the future, the support policy may be further upgraded to cover more workers who need flexible working hours.
According to a report done by Huazhong University of Science and Technology, the employment rate for women decreased by more than 6% after their first child, and then by another 9% after their second child. So moms do face difficulties when it comes to maintaining a job. And with the government pushing for a higher birth rate, having moms post is becoming more and more important. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Zhongshan.
Artificial intelligence powered by the Chinese tech company Huawei is helping to monitor and protect the health of Austria's natural habitat. Each year, listening devices collect tens of thousands of hours of birdsong. And the data gives scientists clues about the health of the wetlands at the country's national park. Our correspondent Zhang Nini reports.
With this microphone, the device is recording the soundscape and all the different sounds from birds, amphibians, and with these antenna we get the connection to the mobile network, and then the data are uploaded to a cloud system.
To avoid biodiversity loss, you will first need to understand how much biodiversity you have. I'm on the shores of Lake Neusiedl in Austria, the home to a host of endangered species. Now, a new system is in place to keep track of them by listening to their voices.
Migratory birds in spring, they come to the breeding grounds, to Lake Neusiedl, to the reed belt. They want to get a very nice spot for breeding. This is one of our sampling sites with the edge devices, and they are collecting the sound of this area here. We can just collect these devices with the stick. There it is. And the device is in here in this bag. and we have set it up so that it collects 1 minute sample every 10 minutes. So this is basically the whole device. So it's the battery. You see this little hole, that is the microphone. And this is the SD card where the data is then stored. All together with all the 60 stations we have here in the reed belt, collecting such a lot of data. We are up several terabytes already on data.
So there are 68 devices like this?
Yes, set out in the reed belt. So now we will collect the data, take the SD card with us, and put a new one in so that we can deploy it and put it back in the field.
You've got thousands of hours of data. How can you possibly go through all of it?
We are using software able to identify species for all these individual sites which produce certain sounds there.
Can we hear one of the sound files?
Well, of course. Here we are. So now you can hear this song of the blue throat, which is not a very loud song, but very complex. Let's move forward to the common redshank.
So how does the system work?
So at the beginning, you really need bird experts, of ornithologists, to tell the software how the signal of a call of a certain bird species should look like. And then you are using this example to tell the software for what the software should search for within this 10,000s of sound files. And what you see here is the result of such a pattern matching for a very common species, the pheasant. However, not all of these identified sounds really are calls produced by a pheasant. So the software is not 100% perfect, and that's why we are now trying to implement artificial intelligence, machine learning. We will provide to this neural network a lot of examples of calls, our target species, and this software will combine this information and will learn to more perfectly identify individual bird species from the provided sound files.
Christian Schulz from the University of Vienna, ending that report by Zhang Nini. And finally, a bid for freedom was thwarted in South Korea after a young zebra that escaped from a children's zoo in the capital was recaptured. The animal was seen wandering through traffic and a residential area before his 3-hour adventure was ended with a tranquilizer dart. The zoo said he's in a stable condition and an investigation is underway to see how he managed to escape. The headlines again. Ukraine's president visits the front line around besieged Bakhmut amid signs that fighting in the city is now at a deadlock. Our other headlines: 1 million rounds of ammunition. EU leaders prepare to agree a military aid package for Ukraine as they meet in Brussels. And French workers protesting against President Macron's plans to raise the pension age, block access to a terminal at Paris's main airport. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. More news at CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.